When we talk about powerful communication over the last 30 years, clearly the development of the internet is absolutely critical. My first awareness of the internet was in 1996. I was just about to start university and I was working weekends at my local radio station in Paisley doing news and sports bulletins. And in the newsroom, we were connected up to a news agency, so there was text information and audio clips coming in via a satellite on the roof of the building. And that was how we got the news. That was how we knew what was going on in the world. And then I would take that, add the Scottish news, add the Scottish sport, which I would put together myself, and then go on the radio and broadcast a news bulletin. And one Saturday morning, probably around about 6:30 in the morning, we got an alert through this. It was a printer in the newsroom that would just automatically start printing news as it arrived. Came up the wires, although it was a satellite feed in the late mid-90s. So news came through that a bomb had gone off at the Atlanta Olympics. And about 15 minutes after that, my boss came into the radio station. This was a guy called John. And I said, there's a bomb's gone off at the Atlanta Olympics. Or in Atlanta, which was hosting the Olympics. And he disappeared into his office. I started getting the news bulletin ready, put it all together. And after a few minutes, I heard what I now know. I heard the dial-up modem going, because the computer terminal where I was typing the news, it wasn't connected to anything. It was a word processor that sat on its own. So it's not connected to even another computer, never mind the outside world. So there's this printer that I've got connected to this news feed via satellite from the news agency. The computer I'm typing on is just a dumb word processor. But John's got this PC in his office with this dial-up modem. So I hear the dial-up modem kicking in. And then about 15 minutes later, I hear his printer kicks into life. And so about 20 minutes after that initial conversation, he appears from his office with this 2 pages of A4 that he staples together. And he hands it to me and he says, look, there you go. There's what's happening in Atlanta. I've downloaded it. I think it might have been CNN.com. I think it was maybe too early even for the BBC website. Anyway, it was some news organisation website he's been on. And he's downloaded and printed out this little news report. And it was about 3 paragraphs with a little very grainy thumbnail, which I think was static. And it just played audio. It had the Real Audio logo on it. And there was an audio clip, which obviously I couldn't hear because I'm just looking at a printout, but there's an audio clip of an eyewitness, somebody who's seen this bomb going off. So he shows me this as though it's amazing. And I'm like, John, I told you. I just told you what had happened 20 minutes ago. You've just gone through all this rigmarole with your dial-up modem and your printer, and now you've given me something that, look, it says it's 3 hours out of date, this information. I've got my printer and my satellite feed, my news agency. What's the point in this? What's all this about? Okay, now you've got a nice little handy printout of the day. Great, good for you. And he just looked at me as if you just don't get this. You don't get this. This is going to change everything. This is a leap forward. His mind was blown that he'd been able to do this. And I was just completely didn't get it at all. Little did I know how things were going to change. So then a couple of months later, I start university, and they've got a library, and there's a computer department within the library. And I was weeks even getting registered to get my card so as I could use the computer facilities. I immersed myself in the library. I'd read the journals. I was, genning up on all the history of broadcasting and media in the UK and getting on with my coursework and making new friends. And it was kind of nagging away at me. There was you should go and get your computer card so that you can access the university email. Well, who the hell is going to email me? And I was kind of aware that maybe there was some other people on the course that were maybe a wee bit more savvy than me that were using this email thing. I had a university email address. Didn't really know what that meant. It was just all these numbers. And I'd seen on the notice board, if people were maybe looking for somebody to share a flat with, or they're organising a night out, they might be exchanging email addresses. I thought, well, I better go and look at this thing. So go and get my card, get access to the computer lab. I think I better go and see what this internet thing's all about. So I check my email, and then I'm sitting in front of this PC, and I think, oh, okay, all right, I'll go on. Let's do this. Let's take the plunge. I'll go on the internet. And so there's this browser called Netscape Navigator, which was it was like the wheels that steer ships. That was their logo. It's all black and white for the first few months. So I click on that, and the university homepage loads, which just looks incredibly boring, but there's bits and pieces of information about the university, and I realised, okay, right, so they're using this, and they're putting things on their website, and there's information here, all that stuff, the physical handbook that they gave me when I started. Oh, look, that's all there too. Okay, all right. And then I think I somehow was maybe looking at the guy next to me, the person on the screen next to me. He's on this Yahoo thing. It's like a kind of directory. Now, if you don't know the history and you listen to this now, it's like Google, okay? Before Google, there was Yahoo. There was various others, but Yahoo was one of the big ones. So I go on to Yahoo, and I realise, by looking at what other people are doing, I can type stuff in and then find out more about it. So at the time, I was quite into WWF Pro Wrestling, and obviously being in the UK, not having access to Sky TV, I'm at a total disadvantage. So I was buying the magazine every month, but other than that, I didn't really know what was going on. So I realised if I type in WWF Wrestling, I don't get their website, because they don't have a website. What they do have, though, is they've got some sort of presence on AOL, which was America Online, which is like a kind of walled garden website, which I didn't have access to. So I couldn't see what they were doing, but what I did get was lots of message boards. So this is like very early, I suppose, Reddit, maybe Twitter, message boards where people could go on, and a lot of them would share news, right? So if they're sitting watching the WWF TV show or the pay-per-view, they would just write up what happened. So I don't need to watch it. I don't need to wait to the magazine. I'm getting all this information now, almost in real time. And then there's this discussion around it all as well. And God, I can create a username, I can register, and I can actually go on and contribute to these discussion threads as well. Now, I didn't do a massive amount of that in those days, but it became apparent that people were making friendships. People were forming allegiances and bonds just by getting to know each other online. And then I would think, well, if I go back to Yahoo, what happens if I just start typing in names? And so Pepsi. Oh, there's Pepsi.com, right? Okay, so all these large businesses, they have these websites, and there's not much on them at the moment, and they're painfully slow to load. But okay, so this is so I can go and talk to Pepsi, and they can share information about their products. Now, it was overwhelmingly American, because in those days, the idea of having like different versions of a website for different territories around the world wasn't really happening, and everything was open. So the idea of things being closed off to different countries didn't exist. Everything was open. There wasn't a lot there. After a couple of months, Netscape Navigator gets upgraded, so it becomes Netscape Navigator Gold. And a little while after that, I realised that, there's this Google seems maybe better than Yahoo. People are using Google. I can get my own email address, so I don't need to just use the university one. I can have actually my own. And then it was, this GeoCities thing. So how do I get my own website? What can I do with this? Well, here's GeoCities, and it's free. And it means anyone that wants to, and you don't even need a credit card, you can have a free website. You'll have a really horrible, ugly domain name, but that didn't really matter back then. And so I go on and I start playing around with HTML code, which I don't know how. I think I maybe learned it from forums. I might have had a book, and there was other websites that would help with HTML code. GeoCities was pretty user friendly, but this was before you could just drag and drop. So I was writing, I mean, it was rubbish, basic HTML code, and built a little website for the radio station that I was working at the time. They didn't have a website, so I thought, well, I'll make them one. And it was bright yellow, and it had a hit counter at the bottom that told you how many people had visited. And I think at one point it might even have been blinking or flashing on and off. And that was how a lot of sort of homemade websites looked at the time. So this is, I suppose the closest you've got now would be something like Wix or WordPress. But this is earlier than that. And it's a thing called GeoCities, which is a whole community of basically independent, homemade little websites with minimal coding. And that was how it all began for me. And then more and more as I progressed through my course at university, I was there for 3 years doing my journalism degree. The university, they would be saying, oh, if you need that information, it's on the internet. Or if you want to look up that journal, you know, you're at an academic institution, you can get access to it. Here's the address. And in those days when somebody gave you a web address, they would write out https://www. And it was only, I mean, we were months and months where you realise, okay, they all start like that. And there's no at in a web address. At means it's an email address. Oh, I didn't. It took months for that to click. https://www. So start realizing, okay, right, so there's information that I might have found in the library, probably is in the library, but it's also on this internet thing. And so for me, in those days, where I suppose I saw the value in the internet was it's an extension of the library, and it was physically in the library. So because they kind of moved all the computers moved out of the computer unit into the library. And I've always thought that there should be a real crossover, a real relationship between the internet and libraries. Primarily, I think when the internet is at its best, I think it's a research tool. Now, in those days, in the mid to late 90s, there wasn't much of an archive. There wasn't much history on the internet. So it was message boards, it was things that were happening now, text-based, real-time, and it was individuals expressing themselves and getting to know each other. And it was very, very early days in terms of corporations actually trying to figure out what can we do with this? Why should we even have a website? You know, and it's a bit like probably a few years ago I was hearing from businesses saying, why should we be on Instagram? What are we going to do with Instagram? And now many of them are. Well, 1996, 97, 98, a lot of organizations were having that same discussion about whether or not they should have a website. Now, there's always exceptions. I wasn't aware at the time that eBay was going and that Amazon had started, and I think, was it Domino's Pizza? I think they were doing, or maybe Pizza Hut were doing very early pizza deliveries back in the late 90s, but it was all very experimental, and primarily it was all in the United States. So you'd load up a website, it'd be a 1-800 number, you'd put an address in, it'd tell you this doesn't work, you can't do this in the UK. You could access the website, and we just couldn't do very much with it. And that was sort of how it began for me, and that was what I thought the internet was. It was a way that I could get news and information. And obviously, I didn't spend all my time in the newsroom. So the satellite feed with the latest news, I couldn't get that. I didn't even, in my sort of student accommodation, I didn't even have a television. I had a television, but it didn't have teletext on it or CFAX. So it was the way for me to find out what was happening. And there was a kind of funny period maybe between maybe 1997 and I would say maybe right up to like 2004, where people would surf the internet. And what they meant by that was, oh, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do or what I'm looking for. I'm just going to go on and sort of see what happens and see what I can find. And I guess it's a bit like now the way that people might browse a TikTok feed, or they might browse Facebook. They just go on and scroll. But in those days, you weren't watching videos of people dancing. It wasn't an entertainment platform. It was a news, information, connection platform. That's certainly what it was for me. The idea that one day you would just sit and, watch people dancing or watch or just look at pictures of stuff was completely alien. And of course, what came in was all the nostalgia. So if you take that generation, like I was 18, just turned 18 the first time I looked at the internet. The nostalgia that came along that sort of backfilled for that generation. So people my age growing up start putting things on the internet about their childhood, from the sort of 80s onwards. And so now, a huge part of my life and my history is all there. Pictures, video, and very easy for me to go and relive and go and explore. And here I am in my mid-40s, and that's what I'm doing. I'm not watching wrestling anymore. I'm listening to podcasts and watching video interviews about the wrestling in the 80s and 90s, about the radio industry in the 80s and 90s. It's incredible how it's changed. I think so much of it has kind of changed for the worst. In those early days, there was this great community. You could do a Google search or a Yahoo search on like your name, and you'd find someone in America or wherever with your name, and they might have a website, and you go and say hello to them, and you'd have a chat, and it seemed like it was a nice place. It was a community of people with shared interests that were probably all a bit sort of computer minded. Geek would be the maybe one way of describing it, but because you had to be quite sort of computer savvy just to go on and make it work. You had to click a button and activate a dial-up modem. You had to be quite patient. You had to be willing to persevere and suss it out as you went along. And people don't do that now. And so what came along afterwards was everybody that just saw this as an easy way to be distracted, or for titillation, or to make mischief, And I remember one early day in terms of my journey with the internet. My brother came to visit me, and he stayed for a couple of nights. And I said to him, "Come on, have you ever been on the internet?" He goes, "No, what's that?" I go, "I'll show you. Come with me." So we go across the road into the computer unit, fire up the PC, bring it up, and I said, "Look, there's these things. This is a Yahoo chat room. Like, pick something you're interested in. Let's go in." So we make up. He sits at one computer. I sit at the next one. We make up usernames. We go into this Yahoo chat room, and it's there's nothing going on. It's dead boring. Right, come on. I said to him, let's start a fight. We'll see what happens. So I go on and say something. He goes on under his username, starts arguing with me, and we start a fight on the internet chat room, and other people join in, and we're winding them all up. And then I realised, oh right, okay, so this thing has the potential to cause disruption, to cause trouble. There's an element of this that you can make mischief because of the anonymity. Now, it didn't occur to me that you're sitting in the computer unit and you're logged on to university PC. Potentially, somebody could be looking at the cookies, or you're maybe leaving a trace. We weren't really misbehaving that bad. It was just a bit of harmless fun. But I did realise, right, okay, so there's things here that you can actually. You could use this to cause to cause disruption or to cause bother. But in the main, it was a really positive place where people would make these connections and start to collaborate with each other. It was a community with shared values. These early internet values are really interesting, and they're all still there if you go and look for them. They've been disrupted horribly by big business and an algorithm. And, you know, in the early days, the internet rewarded people that played nice because you needed these connections and you needed these relationships to be heard and to do anything. Whereas what you've got now, because the algorithm is in charge and the big tech companies are in charge, you've actually got an internet. And hey, we're only talking here about a section of the internet. There's another whole bit of the internet that is about academia, that is about research. There's all sorts of things you can do on the internet. But in terms of the sort of commercial, consumer, public, World Wide Web bit of it, it's heavily driven by an algorithm in terms of the way many people use it today. And it's dominated by big tech and big players. You know, Google's gone from this company that had this message, this motto of don't do evil. They were so fun, they were so quirky. They seemed to really make the world a better place. I mean, they really did for a few years. They're not that anymore. They got hold of YouTube, and so you've got this kind of algorithmically driven video platform where people spend a lot of time, and it absolutely, in my view, incentivizes sort of polarizing, negative, horrible stuff. And people come on and advertise on it. And I've seen some of these, I'm not even going to name them, but, you know, some of these guys that go around with cameras, you know, sticking the cameras in front of immigrants and drug addicts and telling particular, you know, versions of reality about our city centres, and they're running ads for quite respected organisations and products. They're making money out of all that negativity. And that was absolutely not the case in the early days of the internet, and it's kind of horrible what it's become. And if you do go on there with, you know, good intentions, you're probably going to get taken advantage of pretty quickly because people won't be who they say they are, and you're going to really struggle to get heard. So those are my reflections on the early days of the internet. Now, I know the purists will say that 1996 on is really not early days of the internet, but they were early days for me, and I think they're early days in terms of most consumer use of the internet in the UK. It's right at the beginning, maybe 94, 95, but it's pretty near the beginning of consumer use of the internet, in terms of there being more there than just academic institutions speaking to each other. The development of pictures, the development of message boards, the idea that here's something like GeoCities where I can come on with no credit card. I didn't even have a proper address. I can go on and actually create something and express myself. So there you go. I just wanted to sort of put that down. We talk about powerful communication, and I'm aware now that there's probably, you know, clients of ours at Comsteria who don't know that story, who weren't there, where their internet began with apps on a phone screen, where their internet began with social media icons and platforms. This idea of saying to someone, what's your homepage? Oh, it's a university, or I've changed it, it's google.com. No, my homepage is the BBC News website. That, to an increasing number of people that we work with, is completely alien. So I wanted just to get this down and tell you that there was a time before big tech, before the algorithms, before the masses came on and realised that the internet was a place where they could spread their hate and their misinformation and then profit out it. Before the internet was a place where you could influence an election. It was a different place. And you might remember the very early days of Twitter. Again, there was a community There was no algorithm. If you followed people, you'd see what they were saying. You would make friends. You would make connections. That existed. We had that. And I know that people have tried to sort of recreate it with things like Blue Sky, and there's people that will tell you that there are pockets of the internet where I suppose that kind of purity that I'm talking about, that equality, that innocence maybe, where that still exists. I suppose, sadly, if I'm being honest, for me, I think when you've lost that innocence, it's gone. And even although there's a bit of me would love to have it back, there's also that bit of me that is, just like so many other people, sucked into the dopamine of YouTube videos, of nostalgia, of pop stars, of celebrity, of just nonsense. And in the early days, I tell you, using the internet absolutely was not a dopamine fix. It was quite the opposite. It was cortisone, because you got so frustrated waiting for the damn thing to load, waiting, it didn't work. It crashed. You had to persevere. It was probably quite good for your brain. It's probably sort of exercising your brain and problem solving and things like that. It's amazing what it's become, and that's in 30 years now. And if that radio station in Paisley was still there, they wouldn't need the satellite on the roof anymore. They would just need a broadband connection, and even if they didn't have a broadband connection, they could tether it through 5G on your phone, and it would all come up that way. It's quite incredible, sort of looking back on it. And I suppose, like, people my age, I hate dividing people by their age, but people my age do have that understanding of where it came from, life before the iPhone. I remember getting an iPod Touch. So I'd had an MP3 player, and I've got one, but this has got a screen, and this has got an internet connection, and my email's always there, and these websites are always there. And I became aware that I'm looking at this every day, looking at this every night. I wasn't always doing that. Prior to that, I had to bring out my laptop. You sits with a laptop in the living room. Well, I did for a little while before phones, but prior to that, I didn't do that. People didn't do that. I'd love it if we could get back to the internet being a research space, being that sort of extension to the library. I really think that we need to protect legacy media. I don't want everything delivered via phone. The idea of putting a CD on or putting vinyl on, I think you're treating the media with respect. The idea of sitting down, watching the news, delivered through broadcast TV, or listening to something on the radio, rather than just skipping through everything. It demanded more of the audience. It demanded your attention. It demanded respect. And there was a unity that came with that. So people would say, did you see that on the news last night? Did you read that in the newspaper? Are you watching this? And people don't do that anymore. And I think ultimately what it's done is it's fractured society. It's fractured our communities, which is fine in some sense. Maybe that's what we wanted. We're all individuals, and we like our own stuff. And I'm as guilty of that or as into that as anybody else. I love that. I love the convenience that comes with that, and I do that all the time. But what that means, because it's fractured, is it means it's really easy for people to come in and cause division and cause mayhem and upset people for their own greed, their own narrow-minded view of the world. The interesting thing for me in the early days of the internet was, I've never spoken to somebody from America before. My goodness me. I could learn about the world. And yes, it started with America, but then it was South America, and then it was Asia. And I think Africa was a little later, but that came in as well, and starting to open up and think, my goodness me, there's a world here that I'm connected to. There's other cultures here that I'm connected to. I can talk to somebody here who's at school or college in the United States and find out a little bit about their life. It opened my mind. Whereas what's happening now, I think, is the complete opposite. But we stick around because there's things there that make us feel good, or there's things there that we've come to rely on, and we're telling ourselves that we need this thing now. And to an extent, that's right. We do need it because there's more and more that's only being delivered that way. And everybody wants your data. Everybody wants to track you. Everything's free, but you're the product. I don't know where we go next. I don't think there's any way out of it. I don't think there's any way of making it better. I do meet people that say they want to spend less time online. They want to try and cut down on screen time and phone time. Every adult I speak to says that. I wish I could get off my phone. I wish I could give up my phone. I hate this. The digital detox. I'm a parent and people talk about, my kids, they're not getting a smartphone until they're like 13, 14, or we moderate screen time, we ration screen time. I think our children maybe are the answer. Maybe they will help us actually, use this in a more smart way. I think it's got so much potential. There's been so much good come from the internet as well. There's been so much connection. There's been whistleblowing. Everybody's got that voice. And I think there was a kind of sweet spot. There was a period where everybody had this connection. Most people had this smartphone. We had this device. We were using it for good. And then I think the last few years, it swung the other way. Anyway, listen, if you're still listening, thank you for sticking with me. I'd love to hear your own reflections on your sort of first experiences of the internet, and how can we get the benefits from it without all the nasty stuff. Isn't it amazing that it's only now that we're seeing any form of regulation? It amazes me that. I mean, and I guess like at the beginning, all that nasty content, it might have been there, but there was no way I was finding it. There's no way I would have never stumbled. And I did a lot of surfing around and looking and exploring, and I never stumbled across anything objectionable. But I guess at some point, long after I'd finished university, at some point, I guess all that stuff has come in, and people have, I suppose, sort of corrupted the internet. And so that has forced the hand, I guess, of government, where they've had to bring in some regulation. But I think it was painfully overdue. And I think it's not really solving the problem that we want it to solve. And there's such a risk, I suppose, with giving everyone a voice, and the idea of giving everybody freedom of speech. The problem is, if you've got freedom of speech, and I would defend that, and everybody's got the right to do that. But in 1996, that freedom of speech would have been your website, that you've made yourself, that you have to somehow get that website found, or it would have been your message board. And then these things still exist, by the way. If you want, you can go and dig all that stuff up. And there are communities of people doing that, and you sometimes hear that such and such. Like you look at something like Discord now, and 4chan and these message boards and things, where you sometimes hear that something nasty was planned using these message boards. So they're still around, but the difference is now that you've got these people, and it's not just hidden on a message board. It's not just their little crappy website. It's YouTube, which, whether they like it or not, YouTube is a mainstream media company. It's enormous. It's up there with the BBC and CNN and all these other providers, and yet they're not really operating with much responsibility. Now, I guess there shouldn't really be illegal content on YouTube, but there's certainly plenty of unhelpful, nasty, and divisive content with no accountability, no repercussions, and really hardly any fact checking. And the algorithm rewards it. That's the difference. So when you've got your message board or your GeoCities website, the algorithm's not bringing you audience all the time. Only if they go looking for it will they find it. Whereas I don't think that's true on YouTube. I think you could go onto YouTube and look for whatever, and you'll find that nasty, divisive content will float up because of the way the algorithm works. That's where I'd like to see some regulation. So you can have your freedom of speech, but if you're not balanced, if you're not accountable, if you're not putting your address on it so that you can be held to account for the things that you say, then why is the algorithm delivering millions of views? And why are you able to monetize that by having respected organizations actually have their products advertised in between what is basically a completely one-sided sensationalist hate video? That's where I'd like to see some regulation. Anyway, that is quite enough from me, but thank you very much for listening.